Zali, a 2035 net zero target, something the Albanese government didn't commit to before the election. Is that at risk, knowing what we know this morning, that Labor's renewable energy rollout will be 14% behind by 2030?
Look, I think in this discussion, so it wasn't a net zero by 2035. I don't think anyone's saying that that's realistically achievable. But what we have to keep
an emission
in mind,
reductions target, rather.
well, we were due to have that under the Paris Agreement as our nationally determined contribution by February. The very outer limit is September, but really I think it was political convenience for the two major parties not to be explicit with the Australian people of what their future targets would be. Now, we do have to keep in mind when we talk about net zero and we talk about targets, this is not just a number for the sake of it. This is all about mitigating very damaging impacts of global warming. So when you look at the impacts on regional and rural Australia, they are at the forefront of the consequences of failing to act when it comes to productivity for farming land, water, droughts, from bushfires to extreme weather events. These are all going to accelerate. We're going to have huge amounts of areas of our residential areas, but also farming areas that will be uninsurable because of the level of risk that they are exposed to. So we have to keep in mind when we talk about why we need to transition to low emissions technologies, it's to mitigate that risk and those impacts. And so that's why we have to be as ambitious as possible so that as quickly as possible we transition to clean technologies. We don't have the time to wait for nuclear. That has been resoundingly rejected by the Australian people. For the Nationals to still be focused on that shows they still don't fundamentally accept the need to mitigate the impacts of climate change to keep their communities safe. And for that, we must reduce emissions as fast as possible.
Bridget, what do you think about that? Because we are 14% behind by the time we get to 2030 due to delays in big solar and wind projects.
Well, as a report that's been released today suggests, the government doesn't have a plan to actually meet their own targets. And Chris Bowen seems more interested in chasing bouquets from the UN Climate Change Authority to host COP in coming years than he is in actually getting his own target under control. And that's before he starts taxing Australians to purchase utes and cars starting July 1. So we're going to see a more aggressive target by the Labor Party, which is going to mean more unintended negative social, environmental and economic consequences on rural and regional Australians. And as the party that represents them, we're not going to take a backward step in calling that out. Zali, thank you for your elitist admonishing of those of us that don't live in the leafy suburbs of Warringah. And like we do the heavy lifting out in the regions, we have a right as citizens of this country to raise concerns about the rollout of these industrial scale renewables in our community. So when you look at why Labor hasn't been meeting their target, it's because approvals for these projects are lagging. You know why? Not because bureaucrats in local councils are on the go slow with the paperwork. It's because local communities, local citizens are saying, enough. We shouldn't be the only ones bearing the cost of this at both a human and an economic level. And that's a fair enough thing to use the legal availabilities to them to actually raise those.
We've got 30 seconds to go here, but I just want to give Zali the final word here, Zali.
I think everything Bridget has just said reinforces the National Party, even in questioning the idea of need to get to net zero, shows they still don't fundamentally accept that there is a risk caused to their communities by climate change, and there is a fundamental need to address that rapidly.
We just have a different plan.
We've had Matt. I've just listened to you, Bridget.
Plan to get there.
Forget it. Just keep talking.
Okay, we might leave it there because we're out of time, but Zali Steggell and Bridget McKenzie, do appreciate you both coming on the program. Have a great weekend. Chat to you again soon.